Thank you all for coming to my talk, which is called The $1 Million CEO Fraud, Anatomy of a Business Email Compromise. We're going to get right into it now, starting with just a little bit of self-promo. So my name is Damien, but you'll likely find me online under some form of the username sign. As Render mentioned, I work at a local MSP, which is Accurate Network Services, as a security analyst. I'm a two-time NAIT grad with a diploma in IT Systems Administration from the Digital Media and IT program, as well as a post-diploma certificate in cybersecurity. I'm also ISC certified in cybersecurity, which is, I know, the most impressive cert of all time to get. And I have 5 random Microsoft certs, only 4 of which are the fundamentals. So you're dealing with a real professional here. So my main areas of interest within cybersecurity specifically are incident response, forensics, malware analysis, cloud security, and OSINT, just for something a little different. So this is all just because I really enjoy puzzles. I mean, not physical puzzles, I'm really bad at those, but to me there's something so deeply satisfying about taking in data or hunting it down, putting it together, and writing up a report. And yes, I was bullied for being a nerd in school, thank you. I run a blog, which is cybercorner.tech, where if I published it in time, you could read the article version of this talk. It should be up in a few days, or maybe never, we'll see. I have some other articles as well, including a more beginner or limited resourced focused guide on even investigating a 365 business email compromise, as well as a deep dive investigation that I did on a specific malicious Azure app. I really highly recommend that one. My blog also has links to all of my socials, so you can feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, follow me on Blue Sky, that's how you know I'm super elite, and shoot me an email, just whatever you want. Oh, there's too many people here now. I was happy when it was just like 10, but I guess welcome, that's fine, I'll just continue. And before we get started, I just have one house rule. Please save any questions until the question period, because like most IT people, I have ADHD, and if you get me off track, I'm not coming back for like 10 minutes. And then to provide some structure, this is what we'll be discussing today. First, I'll tell you about the incident that this talk got its name from. Then I'll tie the incident to the MITRE ATT&CK cloud matrix. I'll then go over common indicators of compromise and malicious activity for business email compromise. I'll then cover some technical and administrative controls for managing the risk around business email compromise. And finally, if all of that was not enough, I will do some more preaching about why business email compromise is such a big deal and why you should care about it. And after that, we have questions, and then after that, it's lunch, so that'll be nice. And then I should preface this by saying that this is not just a hypothetical talk that I made up for this, or hypothetical incident that I made up for this talk, as unbelievable as that seems to be to some people, including myself sometimes thinking about it. I've anonymized this company, so I won't be saying its name or mentioning details like its industry or size. I should also mention that when you look up what people actually call CEO fraud, this is not technically it, but it was a CEO's account doing fraud, so I figured I could get away with it. So what was the incident? First, discovery. This is just something to kind of set the scene. So, January 10th, 2023. It was a day like any other. I mean, I was doing an audit. Specifically, I was doing an audit for a customer, which I will call Company X. Part of my job is to do security audits for our customers based roughly on the CIS baselines. Now, to be completely honest, I do find audits to be one of the most boring and tedious parts of my job, but I mean, somebody has to do it. I was actually working through a backlog that I definitely only occasionally let build up, so I'd been spending the last few days mainly just doing audits. Considering all of that, can you blame me for maybe going sniffing around for some trouble? I mean, an audit is a great time to do a threat hunt, and checking for a few indicators of compromise wouldn't actually take me that long, right? So truthfully, I remember thinking something exactly like, God, I'm so bored with all of these audits. I wish I had something more interesting to do, like a business email compromise. So I checked the most common indicator of compromise within Microsoft 365, which is what Company X uses as their productivity suite. And this IOC is suspicious sign-ins. And you can export them from the all users sign-in log in Azure. So once you do that, you just open it up in Excel, filter out the known good IP addresses and cities. After I did this, I was left with one account that had several strange locations in their sign-in log. The log showed successful sign-ins from Edmonton and Los Angeles within a few hours. When I used an IP lookup tool on the suspicious IP addresses, they matched known VPN or proxy servers, among other things. Now, Company X had an internal IT type person, so I sent him the sign-in logs for the certain user and asked him if this was expected behavior. He got back to me surprisingly quickly and confirmed that the sign-ins were not legitimate and asked if I could provide a record of file access. Oh, I was so happy right now. I said, absolutely, and then I also worked with him to reset the user's password and just other compromised account remediation steps. So next, I need to complete an incident RCA, or root cause analysis document. This is basically where I just put together all the details about the incident from discovery, remediation, why it happened, but most importantly, what actually happened during the incident. So what happened and how did I reach my conclusion? So it wasn't until I had actually begun my investigation that I realized that the affected user was actually the CEO of Company X. I was reviewing the file access records when I noticed a lot of access to the executive SharePoint site. And this prompted me to check the user's job title in Azure, /Entra, I suppose, at this point. So you can imagine that this pretty much immediately raised the stakes of everything quite a bit. So first, I requested 90 days inbound and outbound message trace for the compromised account. That gave me just over 3,000 results. I then started the export for 90 days of the user activity from the Unified Audit Log, or the UAL. This gave me about 17,500 results. So this isn't a lot to me now, definitely, but at the time, since I had only done a couple investigations, this was more than I'd ever really gotten. I knew I needed something to make my investigation easier, so after some research, I started using the Hawk Forensics tool for investigating Microsoft 365 business email compromise. Hawk provided me with several more logs, including a more granular mailbox audit log with specific email access, all nice and cleaned up, containing about 11,500 records. And then finally, Hawk also provided me with what is my favorite feature of it, which makes it worth the tool, in my opinion, which is the converted authentication log. This uses an IP lookup API to match authentication activity from the audits to the city and country automatically. As you can see, this found 875 IP addresses, so I'm very glad that I did not have to do all of that manually. I also grabbed some other random logs, such as the user audit in Azure, and I eventually e-discovered some emails. So everybody who's investigated an email compromise knows the next steps. You just have to review the audit logs, separate records from known good and suspicious IP addresses. You do it with all the other audit logs, and pretty much anything that you can actually categorize. So now I have a whole pile of information in front of me, and I just have to put it all together. So let's look at this in a timeline. After some investigation, I determined that November 7th, 2022 was the likely date of initial access, although because I had 90 days of records from the UAL, I actually had records going back to October 12th. This was the first suspicious sign-in on the account, but there was also a 365 Defender alert about a malicious URL click on the CEO's account. What this means is that it's likely that the CEO fell victim to a phishing email, which at the time was not caught by the spam filter, but at a later time, Microsoft realized that the URL was malicious, generally through safe links, and sent an alert about it. Unfortunately, it was too late. Then if you remember, January 10th, 2023 was the date of discovery and the start of my investigation. So what happened between? Going back to November 7th, the next account access was on November 11th, where many emails and files, specifically about Company X's dealings with a specific financial company, were accessed. Obviously, our threat actor had a plan because they created an inbox rule to redirect all email from the financial company to the RSS subscriptions folder. Classic. After this, there weren't any specific actions on the account for several weeks. I classify this time period from November 12th to November 29th as reconnaissance, as there were several sign-ins with various files and emails accessed, invoices, contracts, templates, internal documents, that sort of stuff. November 30th is when things start to pick up. the threat actor emails the finance company with a request to add a new authorized signer and asks what information is required. The finance company responds with a list of personal data that's needed and some documents to sign. December 2nd, the threat actor responds with the information and the signed documents. It's on this email that the threat actor CCs the supposed new treasurer, who's using an email address with a custom domain name that would be the type of thing an independent CPA would use, which is what they were claiming this treasurer's background was. On December 5th, the finance company responds with several more documents that need to be signed for the new signer to be added. December 7th, the threat actor provides the signed copies of the documents, but the finance company sees a problem with one of them and it needs to be resigned. December 12th, the threat actor sends the proper documents. They also register another domain, this time a copycat or a typo squat of Company X's main domain. They also create more inbox rules to similarly redirect email from the fake CPA domain and the copycat domain. After this, there's a lot of just general back and forth, primarily while the financial company asks some clarifying questions. The threat actor is also very impatiently emailing the financial company every few days, asking when the authorized signer is going to be added. December 21st, the threat actor emails once again asking for an update. The finance company advises that the National Banking Independent Network, or the NBIN, has gotten involved, which is kind of like an overseer for portfolio and investment management firms, small finance companies, that sort of thing. They've requested more information, which is provided. Finally, on December 23rd, the new treasurer was added to the finance accounts as an authorized signer. So I should mention that if you can't tell, up to this point, all communication about this have been via email. At no point did anybody from the financial company just pick up the phone and call the CEO or any of the other numerous signers on the account to confirm. They didn't even CC any of the other signers on the account in the email chain. They also didn't get the Company X's account manager at the financial company involved. So now it gets serious. The threat actor took a break for Christmas and New Year's, it seems, because the next account activity was actually on January 4th. And this was when the threat actor started to initiate a wire transfer with the CEO's account, advising them to coordinate with the fake treasurer. And they also asked what information would be required. After some back and forth, the fake treasurer initiated a wire transfer to a bank account in Hong Kong for $710,000 USD, which at the time with exchange rate was roughly $950,000 Canadian. On January 6th, the transfer was finalized. Psych, on January 9th, the threat actor sent an email advising that the wire was not received, which it was not. It was resubmitted, and then this time it actually went through. As I mentioned earlier, January 10th was the date of discovery and the start of my investigation, but I wasn't able to complete on that day. I continued my investigation on January 11th, according to my ticket notes at approximately 11:50 a.m. Meanwhile, also on January 11th, at roughly, I believe, 10:36 a.m., the threat actor sent another wire transfer to a different bank account in Hong Kong, this time for roughly $1.3 million Canadian. So I had discovered the January 4th wire transfer first, and I knew at this point that this one had already gone through. So instead of call the CEO and internal IT, I said, I just need to finish my investigation, and then I'll call them to kind of drop the bomb. Pretty quickly after, I discovered that the second wire transfer had been sent at this point roughly 2 hours earlier. So I hoped that there was still time to stop this. I called internal IT, who just happened to be in the CEO's office, and I asked the CEO if he was aware that 2 wire transfers had been made from Company X's account to a bank in Hong Kong. I mean, would it surprise you to hear that he obviously was not? With as much professional urgency in my voice as I could muster, I told him to call the financial company and cancel the transfer, which he thankfully did. So after this, I just continued on. I completed my investigation and put together an incident RCA document. I sent the RCA document and all of the logs and exported emails to Company X, and eventually, at their request, law enforcement as well. Now, the good news is that the financial company refunded Company X for the money that was stolen. Weeks after the incident, I got more information from Company X's account manager at Accurate, who told me that the financial company did not follow their internal process for adding new signers to an account or doing large fund transfers. Additionally, anybody who actually looked at Company X's records would have seen that the transfer to Hong Kong was unprecedented. I can't say what Company X does, but I can assure you that there is no reason for them to be doing any sort of business with Hong Kong. So who hacked Company X? I have no idea, and I don't think I'll ever know. I'm not certain if it was some sort of advanced persistent threat, but this was not a simple heist like changing an employee's banking details. The documents for adding the signer and doing the transfer were complicated. These would need several hours or tens of hours of research and a good knowledge of banking and financial systems general and also just specifically in Canada. They knew the lingo and they knew to wait until New Year's, as sending a wire transfer on December 26th would have probably looked a little suspicious. This was not somebody working alone. But like I said, we'll probably never know, and all we can do is learn from this and improve our security posture so that we don't become this threat actor's next victim. So we're going to pivot a little bit. MITRE ATT&CK is a framework for classifying malicious activity around an incident. It was originally developed for use in APT-caused incidents, but anybody can really use it. Using the matrix, we can view specific techniques and tactics within categories, as well as suggested mitigations, which that is very helpful. You can also use the navigator to actually visualize an incident. So within the MITRE matrices, there's specifically a cloud matrix that contains techniques from general SaaS and IaaS incidents, as well as Office 365, Google Workspace, Azure AD/Entra ID. I found that it's not as detailed as some of the other matrices, but I mean, maybe it'll be improved in the future. I'm only going to go over specific categories with techniques relevant to this incident today, but if you've never heard of MITRE ATT&CK, I recommend you just, take a look, try it out, play around. First, we'll begin with initial access. This was via a phishing link because, as I mentioned earlier, I found the Defender alert buried in the Global Administrator mailbox. Since this was an Office 365 account, we would classify this as a valid account, subtechnique cloud account. Next, we'll look at persistence. MFA was enabled on the account, but it was bypassed either via adversary in the middle, phishing website, or another bypass method. I could not conclusively say. Once they were in the account, the threat actor added an additional MFA method for persistence. Under defense evasion, we have the technique of hiding artifacts and the subtechnique email hiding rules, also known as filters. We also have the technique indicator removal and the subtechnique to clear mailbox data. Emails were frequently deleted by the threat actor, but thankfully I was able to recover them. Finally, under collection, we have the technique of collecting data from information repositories, specifically SharePoint. SharePoint and OneDrive were where large amounts of sensitive company data were accessed from, and this data was used during the fraud. We also have the technique of email collection, specifically remote email collection. I have records of various email access through various protocols, and it's very likely that emails were exfiltrated at various times. So in the last section, we went over some of the activity that a threat actor will do on a compromised email account, but I want to discuss indicators of compromise, or IOC, and other malicious activity further. To assist with this at a later time, I very painfully reviewed every single business email compromise I've responded to and transferred it all into a spreadsheet, and I can use that spreadsheet to visualize some data to demonstrate how prevalent certain activities are, at least in my experience. Overwhelmingly, the most common indicator of compromise for a business email compromise is impossible travel or other suspicious authentication locations of properties. When a user who only accesses from Edmonton suddenly starts using a sketchy proxy server from China, or a user who only accesses from a specific Windows device suddenly starts using a Linux device, you know something strange is happening. So what do threat actors do once they're in the account? Forwarding changes and mail rules or filters are one of the most common forms of malicious activity during a business email compromise. These either redirect certain senders or subjects to a folder or just delete all incoming mail. The latter is used pretty much exclusively in cases where the email is just sending out spam. Emails being read unexpectedly or deleted from certain folders such as the trash or The sent items is just another IOC. So often when an account is accessed, you'll see records for email and file access around sensitive information. Email compromise tools used by hackers often have the ability to just automatically search the inbox and cloud file storage for items with specific keywords such as password, invoice, credit, Visa, etc. Sometimes this is to find invoices so they can craft their own lookalike, but other times it's to find lists of passwords in an Excel spreadsheet stored in SharePoint, because that never happens, right? And this last one is one that I've seen in increasing frequency, at least its second usage, which is OAuth application usage. This is either for OAuth phishing by the user themselves consenting to an unknown malicious application, or by the threat actor for persistence, mailbox exfiltration, or auto-sending. This is one of the activities that I really dread the most, as some of the research I found has found that the common applications used by threat actors could do something like download the entire user mailbox to PST. I've also recently been seeing within 365 environments specifically, application registration directly within the tenant, and this was finally covered by Microsoft with a pretty good threat intelligence article that you can actually only access from the Security Admin Center, of course. So if you want that, hit me up because I stole it. So how common are some of these activities? I will show you. I just learned how to use pivot tables a week ago, and this looks really ugly. I'm sorry, I couldn't make it look nicer. But this graph shows most of the incidents I've handled up until the end of August. I'm missing records from former offboarded customers. As you can see, at first, the most common incident was spam mass mailing, but the last time I responded to an incident with spam mass mailing was actually in March. January 2023, which internally we like to call Hackpocalypse, saw a large increase in not only incidents, but also incidents specifically where sensitive data was accessed. January was actually closer to 11, but, offboarded. November was the first time that I saw threat actor consent to a malicious application, which was specifically an auto-sender application, and that is the purple. Then finally, light green shows incidents where there was very limited activity on the account once it was compromised, and thankfully, this was usually because some form of alerting actually caught the incident and I was able to remediate it before it escalated further. So this even uglier chart shows some more granular data on application usage by threat actors. You can see that in July, I had both an app called Perfect Data Software, which is used for mailbox exfiltration, but also that Azure registered app, which I mentioned. And I was only actually alerted to the Azure app because Microsoft disabled it. Inbox rules were created in about 2/3 of the incidents, and they're generally consistent, redirecting mail to the RSS subscriptions or conversation history folder, or just deleting all incoming emails. Spam emails were sent in about 1/4 of the incidents, generally containing either a link to a phishing website via a fake PDF or DocuSign link, but also once just a fake PDF with a redirect stored directly in the user's OneNote. That was interesting. And then finally, this chart makes me cry inside and has been a big source of problems lately. It is MFA status on compromised accounts. But MFA protects accounts 100%, right? And there's nothing wrong with it. So if an account had MFA, it was purple, and if not, it's red. So you can see that July and August were actually the first months where more accounts with MFA were successfully compromised, not just an attempt, than were not. Yeah, we're trying to figure out how to fix that right now. So I have limited data on how often MFA has actually protected accounts, but with the rise in the adversary in the middle phishing kits, I'm guessing it's probably a lot less than the 99.9% of times that Microsoft still claims. So now that we've gone over an email compromise incident and some of the activity that happens during it, what are some of the controls that we can use to mitigate risk around this type of incident? When it comes to technical controls, one of the best ones is phishing-resistant MFA. This is MFA that is resistant to token theft or social engineering, and FIDO2 hardware tokens are a great example of this. Another control I really like is stricter authentication requirements and controls, and these are known as conditional access in 365 or actually context-aware access in Google Workspace. Doing something like geofencing to the company network or restricting access to sensitive resources from only secured, verified company devices really is a great way to prevent any further access once a threat actor has already gotten in the front door. Both Azure and Google allow you to place restrictions on third-party app access to data, and this helps you avoid consent phishing and other malicious uses of OAuth applications. And this one, it seems pretty basic, but another good control I think is important is just a good spam filter. If you harden the one that comes with your email platform or use a third-party one, actually preventing the phishing emails from even reaching the inbox in the first place already helps you reduce risk. And then finally, one of my favorite controls that I think is actually the most vital behind MFA is just alerting. There are alerting for suspicious activities within most cloud email systems, and they aren't all exclusively for the use of enterprise organizations. You don't need a SIM solution, that sort of thing. There are native alertive solutions available in cloud email systems, which may or may not have some licensing limitations. But there are also third-party solutions for both third-party solutions for both solo IT, MSP, large company, small company. It's likely that enabling alerting for all customers instead of just a subset, which we had before, and we did this in January 2023, is probably a large reason why we've seen an increase in email compromise activities, admittedly. And then not sponsored, but Blumira has let us abuse their free tier for longer than most companies would, and their MSP-focused 365 alerting, which is the free tier, has prevented many incidents from actually reaching the point where they've become more severe. Next, we'll look at administrative controls. I'll always preach this, but I think that security awareness training is a very important administrative control. I mean, provided that it's done right. Nobody really enjoys doing security awareness training, right? But if you can make it so that your employees see it as more than just a boring thing that they're forced to do once a year, they're going to actually retain the information better. Run phishing simulations regularly to test the effectiveness of your program, adapting your simulations to the phishing emails targeting your organization. I mean, who has not seen the increase in QR code phishing emails, right? So that means it's time to send out some education and simulations about QR code phishing emails. Then there's everybody's favorite, which is policies and procedures. You should have policies and procedures for things like how your organization stores sensitive data, email security, and changes to financial information. If a vendor emails you asking to change the account where payments go, what are you going to do to confirm the veracity of this request, if anything? The same for employees. If an employee wants to change their direct deposit information, do you require them to come in person and sign a document, or are you okay if they send HR an email from a personal Gmail account? You'll also want to ensure that the companies you partner with take your financial security seriously. Will your bank actually call you to confirm large changes, such as adding a new authorized signer? What compliance standards do they have to follow, and then do they actually follow them? All of these and more are things to consider when thinking about how to protect your organization from a potentially company-ruining incident. So maybe some of you are thinking this, or more likely know somebody who thinks this way, or this is just a straw man argument I made up, but why should I care? Somebody's email gets hacked and they send some spam, they view a few invoices, maybe we lose $500 or $5,000, right? Well, a large company or small company, nonprofit or law firm, the fallout from a business email compromise can still be highly damaging to a business. Had the second wire transfer gone through, Company X would have struggled to make payroll, which was in 3 days. If your email gets hacked and a customer pays to a fake banking account, do you think they're going to be happy about it, especially if it was your fault in the first place? Do you think I feel safe doing business with a company that had a hacked account send me a phishing email? No, I'm forwarding that shit to the privacy commissioner, right? And speaking of the privacy commissioner, do you think that an email compromise is a privacy breach? Well, we don't store any personal data in our emails, so we're fine. Now, I'm definitely not a lawyer, but according to the Alberta Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner, you might not be. So, a decision from the OIPC in January 2023, hopefully it's kind of readable, describes an incident where an employee of the Calgary Urban Project Society, or CUPS, was successfully phished, and their account just sent out like 150 spam emails. That's it. The OIPC still determined, and I quote, "There is a real risk of significant harm to the individuals affected by this incident." Just emails, right? And they were required to do breach notification, which has anybody gotten a letter from the Dental Association breach? Can you imagine how many they sent out? Not cheap. CUPS and I believe the Dental Association weren't required to do credit monitoring, but you can imagine that's extra not cheap. So here's a picture of their summary decision, but I want to quote what was said specifically on harm in their more in-depth analysis. When it comes to the harm from this incident, this is what the OIPC had to say. In my view, a reasonable person would consider that the contact and identity information at issue could be used to cause the harms of identity theft and fraud. Email addresses could be used for the purposes of phishing, increasing vulnerability to identity theft and fraud. These are all significant harms. And trust me, you can check out the link that I've posted. That is far from the only decision about just spam email sending that says essentially the same thing. There's like 2 from last month. So in my kind of uneducated opinion, the current legislation around privacy breaches, specifically in Alberta and Canada, are relatively toothless, or at least in their enforcement, but a new bill, which is the Canadian Privacy Protection Act, proposes stronger penalties for both the negligence causing the breach, but also failing to report the breach. So hopefully that is enough to give some of you what you need to convince your boss to move to phishing-resistant MFA. So, what did we learn? Well, having an email compromise can turn out very, very badly. Absolutely shocking, I know. They are predictable, and their goal is generally to just keep compromising accounts, hopping from account to account until one with the correct access is found. There's only actually a handful of malicious actions that actually take place on an account, which is helpful for our next point, which is that they are preventable, or at least you can mitigate the risk around them. Alerting on likely or known malicious actions is still one of the best technical controls that I recommend. And finally, although this thinking might be more prevalent in SMB, if it's not, let me know, they're more serious than you might think. I'd guess that there's at least a handful of people in this room who had no idea that the OIPC considered an email simply sending spam to be a privacy breach. Okay, thank you. That's all, and some original content memes I made because somebody told me I need more memes on my PowerPoint. Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions? I don't know if anybody. We have a microphone.
I don't need a mic. Just repeat the question. Okay, the original a breach that you described, what's your gut? If you were to do attribution, I don't know if you really want to even say it, but what's your gut? Who was actually targeting this company?
Chinese state-sponsored hackers. I don't know this specific group. I'd have to look at some more threat intelligence. But I mean, who else would send it to a bank in Hong Kong, right? I mean, maybe. Okay, so are you basically asking, there are organizations that have some pretty heavy email filtering multi-layered solutions. So with that in place, why should they consider anything more than like basic MFA? Why should they kind of move to phishing-resistant MFA? Is that what you're kind of asking? I mean, what did Alyssa Knight say in the keynote? Thinking that you're secure is more dangerous than being not secure. I think something like that. Even the best email filtering solution is still going to have false positives and false negatives. I can't say that we really use the best email filtering solution, but I mean, look at even the QR code phishing. I've seen on Reddit, like one provider so far say, we can prevent the QR code phishing. So, and you also have to consider that this isn't especially for larger organizations, a lot of this isn't going to be simple stuff. The phishing might not even come from email. It might come from an actual like state-sponsored agent who's done like 6 months of OSINT and knows exactly how to get into your organization. So in that case, phishing-resistant MFA might not even prevent it at that point. You're like enterprise-level threat intelligence. Hello.
You said you were checking the IPs and you were checking location. What's your go-to tool?
I just Google a free IP lookup and click the one at the top of the page. The API that Hawk uses is IP stack. I tried to rewrite it to include a different API, but I'm bad at programming. I think you were first.
So the timeline was more than lucky for company X. Do you think, so you mentioned that it all started with you doing the audit. Do you think they had some clues that something was going on and asked for an audit, or was something that has to be done at the end of every year, or how it all started?
So at Accurate, we do an annual audit for customers, and then during onboarding or post-project or pre-sales, which for Company X was actually, it was a pre-sales audit because we wanted to sell them on improving their security. So and so afterwards I got asked, I was like, so somebody pulled me aside and they're like, are you sure this wasn't you? And I was like, if I got $950,000, do you think I would still be here? Like, seriously. I think, see that ADHD, I think I answered your question.
Sort of a two-part question. As far as timelines go with Company X, was this before or after legacy protocols were disabled on their tenant? And the second part is, were they behind the E5P2 paywall that requires a number of those technical controls that you talked about?
Oh, what do you, Devin, was this pre or post?
Oh, this was well post.
Yeah, I felt like this was well post legacy off deprecation. And then they were not, getting companies on P2 and E5 when you're a small MSP and you're working with small companies, very difficult. They had P1, which is for a lot the best that we can get them on, if that.
It's hard for big companies.
Really? Oh, that makes me feel a little better. And then just because I know that I didn't quite have time to go into this, but some people are like, oh, but you said alerting, but then you said that there was alerting and there was a Defender alert cut, so what happened? So when you're an MSP and you have co-managed, sometimes they just do things without your knowledge, and one of that was making like a ton of random like alerts and data loss prevention things that all flooded the global administrator mailbox. The day that the alert for the malicious URL click was triggered, there was like 35 other alerts in the inbox. So have you ever heard of alert fatigue? That's exactly it. Because surrounding that were forwarding changes that were just Microsoft doing Microsoft things. And because we're an MSP and we manage like 150 customers, if we sent the global administrator mailbox to our support email, we'd get like hundreds of emails a day. So that's where we have Blue Mira and other tools like P2, thankfully, for some customers that target the alerting more. But, so if you have alerting, make sure that you have a goodly or like a well-configured alerting solution and you're not susceptible to something like alert fatigue.
I know this is not, apart from the administrative tools for MFA, like security awareness training, do you have any technical tools that you recommend to help prevent MFA fatigue? Because sometimes some of these things happen with staff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Start getting MFA movement. They go easily click on it and say they are authorizing access, which probably wouldn't be. So do you have any technical tools you recommend? Apart from security awareness training,
Not really any technical or administrative controls for preventing something like MFA fatigue. You need to look and see why your users are being fatigued. Why are they being prompted 5 times a day in the company network? I hate when people say zero trust or all of those buzzwords, but you do have to consider, hey, we're in the company office, we're on a company device. Can we start saying, hey, can we do less prompts? Or can we start moving to methods like passwordless or FIDO2 authentication or certificate authentication, where it's a lot I mean, at least I've struggled with FIDO2 in 365. I'm still working on it. But when you've configured things correctly, it's a lot more of a seamless user experience, so that they might not even know that they're actually doing MFA, or they just have to, fingerprint reader, and then they're good for like 2 hours, or hopefully the rest of the day.
Actually, I can give you an example of that. I won't say which company I work for, but where I work, we have what's called MFA Day. So every 60 days, you have to re-authenticate all your MFA, everything you do on the computer, every app. Gotta enter my MFA code. Oh, the next thing, gotta get another one. So we're doing like 10 MFA entries every 60 days in a single day. So if you want to talk about MFA fatigue, don't do that.
I suppose that's also where OAuth kind of comes in, because, OAuth is sometimes a risk, but if you only have one identity provider for like 10 apps, then that's, if you've configured it correctly, only one MFA for 10 apps.
You mentioned authentication irregularities, and you also mentioned alert fatigue. In my experience, these kinds of alerting can trigger a lot of fatigue because you're constantly validating with the user, and you have to, like, the person who's coordinating it has to check up with everybody, and there could be all sorts of reasons, especially with the CEO, because CEOs travel a lot. So my question is, in terms of validating that and staying on top of like C-suite and VPs, like, because this could have just flown under the radar, that he travels all the time. So what do you suggest, or do you have any thoughts on that?
We don't really have a good solution at Accurate because we're still pretty small. My favorite solution is I just tell the help desk to call the user, and I'm like, because I don't want to call the user, and they call the user because we have like 20 help. Sigrid's like, oh no, you're going to make me call the user again? Yes, thank you for calling the user, Sigrid. So sometimes you can leverage other staff to do it, but I'm sure this is also a thing that enterprise struggles with. Eventually, I also just end up asking the help desk, because they know I'm like, hey, does this person travel a lot? Did you notice like that they have a VPN installed? I'll go check the RMM tool, I'll see, oh, they have NordVPN installed, and they're connecting to the same Nord server, or they're connecting, their VPN is Nord, they have Nord installed, they're always connecting to Vancouver. They're probably just being random and connecting to a VPN sometimes.